For millions of years on planet Earth, death was nothing more than an absolute silent biological event. An animal collapsed, its heart stopped beating, and its body immediately returned to the bottom of the food chain. To a wild animal, a fallen herd member is either an obstacle, a source of sudden danger, or a piece of decaying meat. Lions do not grieve for lost pride members. Wolves do not build monuments. A chimpanzee might poke a dead infant for a few hours out of confusion, but within days, life moves on without a single memory left behind. For the vast majority of deep evolutionary time, creatures lived completely in the moment, dying in total obscurity without leaving a single psychological footprint in the minds of those who survived them. Then, something inside the human brain fractured open. To understand the origin of the funeral, you have to understand the terrifying psychological birth of self-awareness. At some point in our distant past, an ancient human ancestor looked down at the lifeless body of a family member, and for the very first time in the entire history of life on Earth, they made a horrific, world-altering mental connection. They did not just see a rotting carcass. They realized, with absolute and terrifying clarity, that the person lying still before them was gone, and that one day their own breathing would stop too. This was the exact moment humanity invented the concept of mortality, and it sent a shockwave of existential terror through our biological hardware. Before this realization, death was just an external event that happened to other things. After this realization, death became an internal psychological nightmare. To live with the constant, agonizing knowledge that your own life will inevitably end requires a massive mental defense mechanism. You cannot simply leave someone you love to be torn apart by hyenas when you now see your own face in theirs. Leaving a companion in the dirt felt like leaving a piece of your own mind behind to rot. So, our ancestors did something radical. They fought back against the void. They invented the ritual. Deep beneath the earth, inside the pitch-black chambers of the Rising Star cave system in South Africa, scientists uncovered a discovery that completely shattered our understanding of human history. Over 300,000 years ago, long before modern humans ever walked the earth, a small-brained hominin species called Homo Naledi was doing something unthinkable. They were carrying their dead through terrifyingly narrow, pitch-black rock shafts, squeezing through gaps barely wider than a human torso, dragging heavy bodies deep into the subterranean darkness. They were not dropping these bodies into the cave by accident. They were deliberately depositing them in isolated, protected subterranean chambers. This was not about basic hygiene. It was not about hiding meat from apex predators. It was an intentional, repeated act of care, courage, and reverence. A human cousin possessing a brain no larger than an orange was already wrestling with the unbearable weight of non-existence. They were braving absolute darkness with primitive fire just to give their dead a permanent, safe resting place. As hundreds of thousands of years rolled on, this psychological response turned into elaborate, emotional art. In Shanidar Cave, located in the rugged mountains of modern-day Iraq, archaeologists excavated the 60,000-year-old skeleton of a Neanderthal man. For decades, popular culture portrayed Neanderthals as brainless, brutal savages who only knew violence. But when scientists analyzed the soil surrounding his grave, they discovered something extraordinary. Deep within the earth, buried alongside his bones, were massive, concentrated clusters of pollen from wildflowers, yarrow, cornflowers, and grape hyacinths. These flowers did not blow into the deep cave on a random wind. They were gathered by hand, woven together, and intentionally laid directly over the dead man's chest. This ancient tribe, surviving in the brutal, freezing cold of the Ice Age, took time away from critical hunting and gathering just to collect bright, colorful blossoms to cover a cold corpse. They were expressing an emotion that no animal on Earth had ever felt before: profound, organized grief. And flowers were only the beginning of this psychological revolution. Before humans learned to bury their dead in soil, they experimented with far darker, far more disturbing ways to process grief. In places like Guff's Cave in England, archaeologists discovered 15,000-year-old human bones covered in precise stone tool cut marks. These were not the marks of mindless warfare or starving cannibalism. The flesh had been carefully removed from the dead, and the skulls had been meticulously crafted into drinking cups. To the modern mind, this sounds like a nightmare, but to the prehistoric mind, mortuary cannibalism was an act of extreme intimacy. By consuming the flesh of a fallen family member, the tribe believed they were preventing that person's vital spirit from vanishing into nothingness. They were literally keeping their loved one alive inside their own bodies, preserving their strength, memory, and presence within the bloodline. It was a visceral, physical attempt to swallow death whole and turn loss into life. When humans finally transitioned from consuming the dead to burying them, graves transformed into elaborate time capsules of survival, power, and devotion. Across ancient Eurasia, early human corpses were heavily dusted in red ochre, a natural iron pigment that mimicked the deep, vivid color of fresh blood. Our ancestors were attempting to physically restore the warmth of life to skin that had grown pale and cold. They placed carved ivory beads, flint hand axes, polished animal teeth, and carved spears directly into the cold hands of the deceased. Think about the immense sacrifice of that single action. In a world where food was constantly scarce, where crafting a single polished stone tool took weeks of exhausting labor, giving up your best weapon or your finest jewelry to bury it deep in the dirt was a massive physical loss. You were literally burying survival gear. But to the early human mind, the dead needed those tools for the next journey, because for the first time in history, humans refused to accept that death was the absolute end. By placing weapons, food, and ornaments inside a grave, our ancestors invented the ultimate psychological comforting mechanism, the concept of the afterlife. At a site called Sunghir in Russia, archaeologists uncovered a 34,000-year-old grave containing 2 young children buried head to head. They were dressed in elaborate clothing, decorated with over 10,000 hand-carved mammoth ivory beads, wearing polished Arctic fox-tooth pendants, and holding spears made from straightened mammoth tusks. Carving a single ivory bead took an estimated 45 minutes of continuous work. That means the tribe spent thousands of hours creating luxury items purely to bury them beneath the frozen earth. This discovery proved something astounding. Long before the first cities, empires, or written laws were ever created, humans had built complex social structures where even children were loved, honored, and given royal treatment in death. The grave was no longer just a place to hide a body, it was a public declaration of love, status, and permanent memory. In Neolithic sites like Jericho and Catalhoyuk, built nearly 10,000 years ago, the living refused to part with the dead even after the body turned to bone. When a family member died, they were buried directly beneath the clay plaster floors of the living room. People slept, cooked, and raised children right above the decaying remains of their parents and grandparents. Even stranger, after the flesh had rotted away, families would reach down into the graves, retrieve the skulls of their ancestors, and bring them up into the house. They covered the bone skulls in smooth plaster, sculpted delicate skin features, and inserted gleaming cowrie shells into the eye sockets to recreate realistic faces. These plastered skulls sat on shelves inside the home. Every single morning, family members would look into the shell eyes of their dead ancestors, talk to them, ask them for advice, and seek their protection. Death was not allowed to break the household. Why did evolution allow such an exhausting, emotionally painful behavior to exist? From a purely cold, biological standpoint, grief is a massive waste of energy. Mourning a dead body uses up vital calories, distracts hunters from getting food, and leaves a tribe vulnerable to enemy attacks. A species driven purely by efficiency should have evolved to ignore death completely. The answer lies in the incredible power of human social bonding. Grief is the tax we pay for love, the exact same neural networks that allowed early humans to form deep, hyper-loyal attachments to their tribe members are the exact same networks that trigger agonizing mental pain when one of those bonds is ripped away. If a tribe didn't feel deep, crushing pain when a member died, they wouldn't fight so fiercely to keep each other alive during a hunt or against a predator. The pain of the grave was the glue that kept early human survival groups from falling apart. Funerals were ultimately designed not for the dead, but to repair the minds of the living. A funeral is a piece of psychological technology designed to heal a broken community. When a key member of a small hunter-gatherer band dies, the social order collapses into fear and confusion. Grief threatens to destroy the group's willpower to survive the wilderness. The funeral ritual steps directly into that chaos and provides rigid structure. It gives the living something physical to do with their hands when their hearts are crushed. It binds the community together, forcing rival members to stand shoulder to shoulder, sing, weep, and share memories. In fact, neuroscientists and historians now believe that early funeral rituals were the exact spark that birthed human religion, mythology, and art. When you bury an ancestor under the floorboards of your cave, that person does not vanish into thin air. They become part of the physical landscape. They become a protective spirit guarding the hearth. Ancestor worship was born right out of the dark edge of the grave pit. Yet, alongside love and grief, the grave also gave birth to a far darker psychological human obsession, the absolute terror of the restless dead. As early humans developed belief in spirits, they became deeply paranoid that a deceased person might return to harm the living. Across dozens of ancient cultures, archaeologists have uncovered graves where the body was subjected to bizarre, violent post-mortem rituals. Skeletons have been found pinned to the earth with massive boulders, buried face down so they couldn't see the surface, or found with their legs deliberately broken and bound with heavy leather ropes. In some European burial sites, ancient humans drove iron spikes directly through the chests of corpses, or placed sharp sickles over their throats so that if the body tried to sit up, it would decapitate itself. Long before modern horror movies or vampire legends existed, our prehistoric ancestors were terrified that the border between life and death was thin and fragile. The funeral became a dual-purpose ritual. It was held to honor the beloved ancestor, but also to safely seal the door so the dead could never walk among the living again. Humans are the only species on Earth that will weep over a pile of dry bones, build giant stone pyramids for people who no longer breathe, and pass down stories of ancestors who lived thousands of years ago. We do not just die, we construct elaborate cultural architectures around the memory of life. The very first funeral was the day humanity declared war on oblivion. It was the precise moment we stopped acting like wild animals driven purely by physical appetite and began acting like spiritual beings driven by love, memory, and hope. Every tombstone in a modern cemetery, every candle lit for a lost friend, every flower laid on a grave is a direct, unbroken continuation of that first primitive hand placing wild blossoms on a cold rock floor in the dark. We bury our dead because we refuse to let the darkness have the final word.